So I was requested to do a video response on Jack Angstreich. I just happened to look up his videos. All his videos seem to have been deleted, and I found videos through other people's debates with him. One of which just so happened to be on the Labour theory of value, and I was requested to do something on the Labour theory of value, so I thought I would cover that. If you just listen here to what Jack Angstreich says in terms of his view on Adam Smith's, hypothesis. Just listen to this.
So, Jack, start us off by defining and explaining the labor theory of value.
Well, I can only, in this space of time, give you a brief sketch of it, because it's actually a fairly complicated theory. But I can give you the basic idea, which is basically it was developed to explain equilibrium prices, or what Adam Smith called natural prices. And it's simply that if we were to draw the prices of goods, if you were to plot those prices on a graph across time, you'd notice that there'd be a basic general level of prices that would be fairly constant, but you would see supply and demand fluctuate. Axis, or those basic axes of prices, and the idea was took supply and demand at equilibrium. If we sort of observe the market prices when supply and demand were at equilibrium, they would cancel, obviously, fall in conditions of increased or decreased supply.
Do you want to check with this mic?
You're really cutting out, Jack. Are you on your bicycle?
Or an equilibrium, of course, when supply and demand are at equilibrium.
Jack, we missed you. We missed you. Cut out.
Oh, sorry. How is it now?
It's good now.
Okay. So that there's still something left over to explain when supply and demand are at equilibrium. They're canceling each other out. And what's left to explain is why market price of a good would be at that level rather than another, right? If we abstract it away from supply and demand forces, right? And so Smith's hypothesis, which is an older one, it goes back to ancient times. I think it's in Aristotle. There's a labor theory of value. Smith's hypothesis was that what determined the equilibrium price was the quantity of labor to make that good.
Adam Smith's labour theory of value, just from the little research that I've done, didn't view value down to that of quantity of labour. It's quite funny that, because if anything, that actually correlates more towards what Karl Marx believed. Adam Smith viewed the labour theory of value, how hard it would be to toil for such work.
Gold is mined. Getting it from ore economically and efficiently involves some complex chemistry.
How hard you would work for something, that relates to meritocracy, which was the old name for capitalism pretty much. You've had meritocracy going right back thousands of years. Meritocracy would be rewarding on hard work, and this is what Adam Smith would have believed. He's saying that it's how hard you would toil for something, so how hard you would work for something, as well as how hard it would be to obtain something. Gold is something that is something harder to obtain. There's a scarcity in quantity, and there's fewer of it. It's harder to find as well. You would spend harder work obtaining such a resource like that of gold, as opposed to said other resources. A rock that you could find in your garden isn't really something that's hard to obtain. You wouldn't spend much work finding rocks. That's why in Adam Smith's view, gold would have been worth more than that of a rock that you find in your garden. It's in relation to do with the laws of supply and demand. Adam Smith didn't just view it down to that of the quantity of labour. It really isn't as simple as that. If you listen to Jack Angstreich, his next argument, he goes on to say
that Smith was sort of unable to resolve certain theoretical problems with that account, and ended up developing in The Wealth of Nations simultaneously two theories of value, a labor theory of value as well as a subjective theory of value. David Ricardo, several decades later, tried to resolve some of the theoretical problems in Smith, wasn't able to fully do that, but made some improvements to the theory. But then Karl Marx, attempted to resolve the remaining problems that were in Ricardo's labor theory of value. And so Marx's theory is based on the idea that, well, first of all, he postulates a theoretical, what might be described as a theoretical unobservable value. And value is meant to explain equilibrium prices. So the basic idea is that under certain restricted conditions, value will coincide with equilibrium prices. But then the question is, what determines value? And Marx's hypothesis was that it was the average quantity, basically the determinant for value for Marx, at least his hypothesis is that what determines value is the average quantity of time that it takes to reproduce the good at a given time and place. And I think Marx's interest in that believed that if you developed this theory, sort of developed the logical implications of this theory, you could then have a basis by which to predict the laws of motion, what he called the laws of motion of the capitalist mode of production. So the purpose of the labor theory of value for Marx was to describe the laws of motion of the capitalist mode of production. So that's more or less the basic idea.
So Jack is right in saying that Karl Marx viewed the quantity of time spent producing something as the labour theory of value, but he also viewed quantity of labour itself in relation to that. So he missed that out. He tried to correlate that with Adam Smith. Like I said, Adam Smith's view of the labour theory of value would be down to how hard you would toil for it in relation to how hard it would be to obtain something. Another thing that he mentioned, of course, was that Adam Smith had this view of two theories. One that was subjective, the other that was somehow, objective. I don't think that's the case. I don't think the subjective theory of value came until a later period in time, which, to be fair to Adam Smith, he was from a time period when it was largely an agrarian style economy. A lot of Jack Angstreich's argument really all goes down to saying a lot while saying very little. In other words, he's basically saying, he came across this problem, and then this person came along and then, tried to fix this problem. He doesn't say what the problem is. He doesn't mention anything about what the problem was. When it comes down to the labour theory of value, it's all a question of what is value? What determines the value of something? What would the price be in relation to that? So how do you determine price? How would you know the price? See, Adam Smith is determining value down to that of scarcity, down to how hard it would be to obtain something. So that's why a rock in your garden that you can easily find, gain access to, it doesn't take you much work to obtain, is not worth as much as that of gold, because gold is something scarce. He's basically saying it's down to the laws of supply and demand. Karl Marx's view of value would be down to the labour time spent on something, as well as on the quantity of labour spent on it. So I jokingly mentioned before about a paper bridge example. It was just a made up silly example that was just something really just to take the piss. Let's just use something of a similar argument. Just other material. Right, let's just say that from Great Britain to New York there was to be, say, 500,000 workers, just hypothetically speaking, and these 500,000 workers, because there's a very, very large quantity of labour spent on producing this bridge, and by the time they finish it, let's just say for argument's sake, they used other means that would make it so that the bridge would take longer to build. And then let's say at the same time, a quantity of labour, let's say 1,000 workers, work on a steel bridge. And this steel bridge is well constructed and it's to go from Britain to New York. The steel bridge really only takes a short period of time to build. It's well constructed, it's built using advanced technology that enables them to do the job much quicker, etc, etc. And there's only 1,000 workers or whatever, we'll just say that hypothetically speaking, right? And the bridge is built. Going by the labour theory of value from Karl Marx, due to the 500,000 quantity of labour and of course the quantity of time spent on the bridge, his bridge, even although using poorer quality materials, would be of higher value than the well constructed steel bridge because there's a fewer quantity of labour. There's only 1,000 people that worked on it, less time was spent on it. Who are the consumers going to trust when they drive in their car and it's the type of bridge that's used for cars crossing? What are they going to trust? Are they going to trust a bridge that's poorly constructed using poorer quality materials that will end up facing damage, or are they going to trust a bridge where it's steel constructed, it's reliable, good quality materials, well, it's a bit obvious what they're going to trust. What people value is really all down to that of what they trust, what the consumer basically wants. It's not down to what you think value is. It's not down to just because of the quantity of labour and the time you spent producing something. That means nothing. You could spend a lot of time on something, you could have a lot of people producing something, but that doesn't mean to say that what you've produced is of any value to the end consumer. If any socialist tells you that that isn't what the Marxist labour theory of value is about, they're lying to you. Even Kevin D. Williamson touched upon this issue in an argument on, the labour theory of value. Again, it's pointed out by others. Mises argues, who's it valuable to, at what time is it valuable, and he also asks the question in relation to what other products at that given time period in the market. As you know, technology changes all the time, folk. Just take, for example, photography. Photography is something that changes dramatically. Technology changes all the time. And I know this myself as a photographer. My Canon 5D Mark III has changed in its price and value dramatically over the last few years because of the new cameras coming out, these new models, whether it's the mirrorless cameras or it's the 5D Mark IV, and I wouldn't be surprised if they come out with a 5D Mark V at some point. Newer technology comes out, that's going to have an impact on that product itself in terms of its value and its price. And I also mentioned in my video on the economic calculation problem, and Kevin D. Williamson addressed this, house party. How do you know how much to produce for something planned for the future? You don't know how many people are going to show up at such an event. You have no idea. So Karl Marx, he viewed price as something endogenous. So he viewed something as price as fixed and internally to what the actual thing is. So for example, quantity of labour and the quantity of time spent on producing it, he thought price was something knowable. Price is something that's really only going to be determined through, number one, the laws of supply and demand. So in relation to demand, what are people willing to pay for something? It's just like the argument I said on the $2,000 pizza. A company might sell $2,000 pizzas, but they have to have a market there in order to sell to. If nobody's buying them, they're not going to get away with the price at $2,000. They would be forced to reduce it. Karl Marx viewed price as something fixed and knowable, that you can just set a price. And the problem with Marx's labour theory of value, he didn't understand that prices change and fluctuate with the market. Anybody who understands the market knows the reason why prices fluctuate. They fluctuate because value changes with time. And this is why in all socialist economies you end up seeing, the attempt to try and fix prices. Socialism has always been about trying to fix prices. They do not let the market be. Anybody who tries to correlate, and this is what, Mouth the Infidel tried to do. He honestly tried to correlate this to do with price fluctuations and the laws of supply and demand, and said that Karl Marx did not reject this. Oh yes, he did. That's why I said Karl Marx's view of prices was endogenous, but the reality, Mises understood that prices were exogenous. In other words, prices in relation to the external part of the market, to do with consumers, to do with what other relative, products in the market at that time, and time itself, and who's it valuable to, all of these things. So here are some of the comments that I got from a previous video. Adam goes on to say, Scotty M, here is something funny I commented on Vicky 1999's newest video about the Industrial Revolution and how it improved the standard of living, and cited your two videos about it, of course, in his video. He just says the typical myths. He responded by denying it, so I cited more sources, and 5 minutes later he deleted my comment, so I typed it again. I think he just can't comprehend the truth, so be careful, he might make a response to you. Of course, first of all, Vicky 1999 is actually a woman. I didn't realise that at first, and I've got nothing against the particular person other than her views, but let me just say that she is completely wrong, and the reason why she's deleted your comments is because the arguments that I've made in my video, been well researched by the likes of the Mises Institute. It's just like this whole thing on the Industrial Revolution, you're going to come across a lot of these myths, unfortunately, and, most commonly the claims that there was a collapse of living standards, that there was the exploitation, etc. And of course I've made the arguments on, the things to do with the real wage earning growth rate, etc. All of it contradicts the erroneous claims, and that would have been the reason why, she has deleted your comment. Next comment. Arsene Wari goes on to say, nationalising healthcare is usually promoted as it is seen as against private health corporations. In reality, nationalisation helps the very people so Stems say it will fight. Nationalised healthcare is used to socialise costs of healthcare so domestic corporations can outcompete foreign competition. Well, in my personal argument, the nationalisation is really just an argument by socialists in their goal for communism. Socialism is the slow and gradual path towards it. Take for example Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn says, oh well, I don't really support this whole thing of communism, and at the end of the day I just support this thing of let's just nationalise this. Where do you draw the line then? Because once they've nationalised that, give it a year or 2 years down the line, and then they start calling for nationalising the next thing, and then another couple of years down the line it's nationalise this. When they nationalise one thing, it doesn't stop. Because then they start, arguing and saying, oh well, here's another part of the private sector that just doesn't seem to be working. Maybe it'll be better off, nationalised. They then nationalise that, and then they go after the next thing. They say, oh look, capitalism's not working here, so we'll nationalise that. So what ends up happening over a long and gradual time period is nationalisation on a slow and gradual time period, because they know for a fact nobody would ever accept the sudden loss of their freedom, so they nationalise over a slow and gradual time period. Of course, the only reason why you're being prevented from going in such a direction is because you've got enough politicians to prevent you. It's like a tug of war, right? Socialism's trying to drag you in that direction. Dios goes on to say, did you ever watch Tailed Features stream with Tam Laird recently? Yeah, I've met Tam a few times before, and he's a nice enough guy in that, and it's such a coincidence, like he made the exact same argument that I did. It's one of these things that people are very, quick to come out and defend the NHS when it comes to those arguments, but at the same time they contradict themselves. Off the cuff discussions, they will say, oh well, I'm left in a long waiting line, waiting for weeks and weeks, and I'm still waiting for my doctor to get back to me. They're constantly contradicting themselves. It's not until an actual argument of the NHS comes up, what do you know, his own argument is very reasonable, and from what he stated on the NHS is exactly what I've just basically been saying. It's just a catastrophic failure. It's a religious institution that's propped up, and the argument I'm going to make obviously against American healthcare costs, I will be doing that next. Pee-wee mentions, and I know the argument these socialists are going to make against my argument against healthcare being a human right. Oh, but by using your logic, does that make parents slaves to their children because they provide their kids with food, education, healthcare, etc., even though their kids haven't done anything but exist? Here's the thing, when the parents feed, educate and shelter their children, when the child grows, he's going to return those favours back. He will take care of his parents, work hard, so he can afford to pay to feed them and shelter them. So really it was just a similar argument to that of the Black Lives Matter thing, where it says all houses matter, and it showed an illustration of the burning house. Well, the child is actually under, the parents, and of course the parents have a responsibility to the upbringing of their children. It's a very, very illogical argument if they were to ever bring up something like that. Healthcare is not a right because you don't have the right to another person's earnings. I'm not saying someone's actually physically holding a gun to their head. If you don't pay the tax, you're threatened with the jail. That's the issue. It is theft. You cannot hold someone against their will, force them into doing something. That's the very problem with socialism. Everything requires coercion. Entertainment Garrett mentions, hey, can you debunk second thought? he has one of the most fallacious videos on capitalism that has more than 1 million views, and most people just buy it. Yes, this is a sad thing, right? You're always going to come across these people who make all these arguments against capitalism, and it's all the usual nonsense, but always find, right, even without even watching their video, it's always the same arguments. It's the same arguments saying capitalism results in this dangerous concentration of wealth in the hands of the few, capitalism results in this exploitation, or, you know, they use examples of today's monopolies, etc., through the corporatist system, and they say, well, you know, this is the fault of capitalism. Capitalism caused the booms and bust cycles. But you could go through all of them. But yeah, I will definitely look at his video, and of course I'll get around to doing a response on that. So anyway, folk, I hope you've enjoyed the video. Like I said, any requests, just comment in the comment section below, and if you've got anything you would like to add to yourself with your own arguments on the labour theory of value, your own thoughts and whatnot, be sure to comment in the comment section below. I would more than love, however, that if any of you have read Adam Smith, feel free to make your argument. Did he argue in favour of the subjective theory? I'm not entirely sure that he has or not. If he had, it would be nice to see your own comments. Anyway, folk, thank you for watching my video, and I shall talk to you later. Cheers.